At exactly 9 o'clock p.m., the engines roared into view, dozens of Marines in full formation, lining a quiet suburban street like it was a battlefield. No words, no banners, just a wall of veterans staring down the HOA office across from one man's porch. But what happened next will shock even those who thought they'd seen everything. But first, let's go back to the beginning. John Mathis rose at 5:03 a.m. every day. Not because he had to, but because that was how he was wired. 40 years of service don't unravel just because you've hung up the uniform. His knees ached, his back stiffened on cold mornings, but none of it mattered. He'd shuffle to the kitchen in slippers worn thin at the soles, pour black coffee into a chipped white mug stamped USMC, and stand by the window until the sky started to bruise with light. Then he'd step outside. His fingers, though swollen with arthritis, moved with the practiced precision of ritual. He unfurled the flag slowly, deliberately, never letting it touch the ground, and clipped it to the pole beside his front door. There was reverence in his movements, a kind of sacred weight that made the air around him still. The flag was weathered, corners frayed, fabric thin where sun and sand had scoured it. A single thread still held where a bullet tore through it outside Kandahar. He didn't replace it. He couldn't. For John, that flag wasn't decoration. It was a headstone without a grave. He watched it rise each morning like it was breathing for someone else. For Corporal Davis, who bled out in his lap whispering a prayer. For Lieutenant Ung, whose last act was dragging 3 men to safety. For Sergeant Boone, who didn't make it past Fallujah. John had lived what others called service, but he called it remembrance. That flag, that faded emblem of sacrifice, was the only promise he could still keep. Which is why the envelope felt like a gunshot. Tucked behind a glossy real estate flyer on his porch, it sat too neatly, too smugly upright. He knew before he opened it, something in the paper's unnatural weight, that this wasn't just junk mail. He slid it open with the blade he still kept near the door, read the words slowly, twice, as if the letters might rearrange themselves into something human. Violation 4.3a. Unapproved exterior installations, unauthorized flag display. A 312.56 fine. No name, no signature. Just sterile lines, corporate logo, and a due date. John stood there, letter trembling in his hand, the flag flapping quietly behind him in the desert wind. His face didn't change, but something inside him, something old, tightly coiled, twisted once, then went very still. He'd buried brothers under that flag. Now they were telling him it didn't belong, not here. Not like this. He didn't say a word, just folded the paper once, twice, tucked it into his back pocket, and turned his eyes to the flag. And for a long, silent moment, it was the only thing moving. The community clubhouse smelled faintly of lemon cleaner and bureaucracy. Fluorescent lights buzzed overhead like angry wasps. Folding chairs had been arranged in uneven rows, facing a laminate table where 3 members of the HOA board sat like petty magistrates. At the center of it all was Craig Halberd, tan, gelled, and 34, give or take the Botox. He leaned back with the self-assurance of a man who'd never been told no by anyone who mattered, wearing a designer golf polo and tapping his iPad with impatient fingers. "Let's keep this short, folks," he began, barely looking up. "We've got several minor violations to address tonight, including, yes." He tapped the screen, lips curling into something between a smirk and a lecture. A flag. There was a pause. A few heads turned toward John Mathis, seated stiffly in the back row. His hands rested on his thighs, knuckles pale, spine straight as a rifle barrel. He said nothing. Craig stood now, walking a slow arc in front of the table, as if delivering a TED Talk. "Look, no one's attacking patriotism here. We all appreciate service. But we also have standards. We agreed on those when we signed community agreements. Presentation matters. He gestured vaguely at a printed color chart tacked to the bulletin board. Acceptable porch items, Section 4. Lawn gnomes? No. Fluorescent door wreaths? No. And unregistered flagpoles? Sorry, also no. He took a sip from his almond protein shake, lips pursed as if the drink somehow validated his authority. We want cohesion, not clutter. Aesthetics reflect pride. Across the room, young couples nodded, not with conviction but with apathy. Some jotted notes, others scrolled on their phones. To them, it was a minor infraction in a world full of headlines. No one wanted trouble over a flag. But John wasn't nodding. He stared at Craig with the same unblinking calm he'd once held under fire. Not anger, something deeper, like a dam holding back a flood. This man, who had never once saluted a casket or watched a brother bleed out on foreign soil, was calling that flag clutter. That threadbare rectangle of memory, faded by sandstorms, not time, was being weighed against garden gnomes and door wreaths. Craig smiled like he'd won something. He sat down, tapped a gavel that didn't need tapping, and moved on to parking violations. That night, just before sunset, John lowered the flag, slowly, reverently. One last time, not out of submission, but because some battles aren't fought in meetings. They're fought in silence, in memory, in the quiet before the storm. The garage was quiet, except for the low tick of an old wall clock and the occasional creak of the wooden rafters settling in the Nevada heat. John stood beneath the single dim bulb, surrounded by the ghosts of his past. Boxes labeled in careful block letters. MREs, field gear, Boone's dog tags. A stack of campaign medals sat gathering dust beside a shelf of oil cans. Everything in here had a purpose, a history, a weight. He didn't need to be told how to fold a flag. His hands moved on muscle memory alone, triangle over triangle, tight and precise, until only a neat blue wedge remained. Stars pointed upward like silent eyes. He'd done this more times than he cared to remember, at funerals that blurred together with widows clutching his forearm and children too young to understand why the man in the casket wouldn't be coming home. But this time it wasn't death that brought the fold. It was insult. His hands trembled, not from age, but from something older, something colder, a slow-burning ache that had nothing to do with arthritis. It was the weight of invisibility, of feeling like everything you gave, everything you endured, could be scrubbed clean with a fine and a rule book written by men who never saluted anything but a boardroom. He sat heavily on an old ammo crate, the folded flag resting in his lap like a wound. The silence pressed in, thick, stifling. Outside, he could hear a lawnmower humming 2 houses down, kids laughing faintly in the distance. Life was going on without him, as if none of it, Kuwait, Kandahar, the surgeries, the medals, the years, had ever happened. He wiped his hands on his jeans, walked over to the old laptop balanced on a workbench beside a cracked coffee mug. The screen flickered to life, familiar blue and white. A Facebook group, Semper Fi Brotherhood. John clicked into the new post window and stared at the blinking cursor. It pulsed like a heartbeat, waiting. He typed slowly. HOA fined me for flying the flag by my door, said it was unapproved. Never thought I'd live to see this. No emojis, no hashtags, no anger in bold font, just the naked sting of betrayal. A few taps. Post. Then he closed the laptop, picked up the folded flag again, and just held it. It didn't feel like a relic. It felt like a burial. It started as a flicker. A notification here, a comment there. By 5:13 a.m., John's phone, an old, scuffed flip model with a screen no bigger than a business card, began vibrating in short bursts on the kitchen counter. He didn't notice at first. He was busy brewing coffee, watching the sun rise through the blinds, the folded flag still sitting solemnly on the kitchen table, untouched since the night before. When he finally answered the phone, it wasn't a call. It was a cascade. Messages flooded in from names he hadn't heard in decades. Old unit members, Marines he'd once thought long gone, sons of fallen brothers, even strangers who started their messages the same way. "Sir, I saw your post." He booted up the laptop. The screen loaded slowly, hesitating under the strain of a tidal wave it wasn't built to handle. 58,431 shares, 103,000 reactions, 14,000 comments. The numbers felt abstract, but the words did not. "We've got your 6, Gunny. My dad served too. This makes my blood boil. Tell us where. We're coming." Some attached photos. Rows of motorcycles parked under flags, veterans saluting in silence, Marines in wheelchairs with rifles across their laps. There was no plan, no leader, no agenda, just fire, burning through every platform. The post was screen-capped, reshared, turned into videos layered with solemn piano music and voiceovers. This man was fined for flying the flag he fought under. Fox News picked it up by noon. So did TikTok, where a teenage veteran's daughter tearfully read John's post to camera and said, "They tried to silence him. Not today." By late afternoon, the HOA's panic began to show. A second letter came, this time slipped into his mailbox, printed on heavier stock, as if thicker paper could carry more threat. Notice of escalation. Violation 4.3a. Failure to resolve will result in a lien placed against property. No signature. Just a threat with the full weight of silence behind it. John stood on his porch reading it when Craig Halberd strutted by with 2 purebred doodles tugging at leather leashes. He didn't pause, just slowed enough to toss a glance sideways and smirk. "Rules are rules, old man." The words were smug, rehearsed, the kind of line a man tells himself is brave. John said nothing. He simply turned, walked inside, and opened the wooden chest at the foot of his bed, the one that hadn't been touched in 7 years. Inside was his dress blues, pressed and folded with reverence, silver buttons, crimson trim, medals that still carried dust from 2 continents. He didn't need a mirror. He remembered every movement, every crease. As he buttoned the jacket and slid the ribbons into place, something settled in his chest. Not rage, not pride. Readiness. At first, it was just a murmur beneath the evening breeze, a strange vibration, subtle but unmistakable, that threaded itself through the pavement like a warning. Dogs began to bark, not in frenzy, but in instinct, and porch lights blinked on one by one as neighbors stepped onto their lawns with puzzled glances. It was 8:42 p.m. Then the sound thickened. Not music, not fireworks. Engines, dozens of them, low, throaty, and in perfect sync, like a mechanical heartbeat miles wide. It wasn't the sound of chaos. It was the sound of coordination, of intent. John Mathis sat on his porch in full dress uniform. The soft desert wind brushed against his shoulders. His face was unreadable. The flag still sat folded in his lap, not yet raised, not yet claimed. His eyes remained forward, unmoving, but his jaw twitched once as the first headlights cut through the dusk at the far end of the street. By 9:00 p.m., the neighborhood no longer resembled itself. The cul-de-sac was lined, bumper to bumper, with machines that had seen war, motorcycles with custom tanks painted in desert camo and POW emblems, trucks bearing Gold Star decals, a pair of vintage Humvees still marked with faded serial numbers. And at the center of it all, rolling to a deliberate halt like a sleeping giant, came a decommissioned marine transport vehicle, its frame towering above the crowd, its flanks draped in flags that snapped sharply in the wind. No one shouted. No one revved their engines or blasted music. They parked in perfect silence and then stood, boots on pavement, backs straight, eyes forward. Veterans, dozens, maybe hundreds, lined up shoulder to shoulder across John's front lawn, spilling into the street, forming a quiet wall of flesh and memory that faced the HOA office like a firing line of principle. They weren't young. Most wore their age openly, silver in their hair, scars etched deep into forearms and faces. But there was nothing fragile about them. The way they stood was a language all its own. No picket signs, no slogans, just a message carved into silence. We don't forget our own. We bury our dead with honor. And we do not let the living be disgraced. Inside his house, lights flicked on behind blinds. Neighbors watched from behind curtains with mouths half open. Some clutched phones. Others clutched their children. But none dared speak. Because in that moment, the street didn't belong to Craig Halberd. It didn't belong to the HOA. It belonged to the fallen, and to the men who never let go of them. The night air had barely settled when a young woman across the street, in pajama pants and a hoodie, quietly lifted her phone. She didn't say a word, just tapped live, angled the camera toward the line of silent veterans standing in formation, and let the image speak for itself. No commentary, no edits. Just men in dress blues and faded fatigues, standing beneath floodlights and flags, unmoving as stone sentinels. By dawn, 2.4 million people had seen it. The stream had exploded overnight, passed from group chats to Facebook pages, from veteran subreddits to political feeds, climbing the ranks of Twitter's trending topics with hashtags like #FlagFine, #WeStandWithJohn, and HOShame. News anchors pulled the footage mid-segment. It aired raw, no graphics, no soundtrack, just the sound of boots and engines and the unbearable power of silence. Local news vans rolled in first, tires crunching gravel as reporters scrambled for angles, but the story had already sprinted past them. By mid-morning, satellite trucks from CNN, Fox, and NBC were jammed curbside, lights strobing across the stucco walls of Craig Halberd's two-story house like crime scene strobes. Helicopters circled overhead. Every shot of John Mathis's porch, flag still folded in his hands, carried the quiet gravity of a battlefield memorial. The HOA's inbox collapsed under the pressure of tens of thousands of emails, many unprintable. Their official website went offline, flooded with traffic. Corporate sponsors for the neighborhood's planned 4th of July event quietly pulled out. A local construction company rescinded its donation for new tennis courts. The community's HOA rating, once a glossy badge for real estate brochures, sank to the lowest in the county. And Craig Halberd? His real estate firm's Yelp page became a wasteland of fury. Veterans from all 50 states left scathing reviews, each angrier than the last. Then someone uncovered old tweets. Craig, 6 years younger, drunk on self-importance, mocking wounded vets as welfare warriors and calling the military the world's biggest scam. Screenshots spread like wildfire. No apology could stop it now. By noon, John's landline rang. It was the mayor. His voice was tight, worn thin. "Sergeant Mathis," he said, "I want to start by saying I'm sorry. I can't undo what they did, but I can damn well make sure it never happens again." There was a pause. "I served too," he added. "What they did was disgraceful. You stood your ground. Let us stand with you now." John didn't say much. He didn't have to. The tide had turned, and this time it wasn't retreating. It came not as a roar, but as a quiet, methodical dismantling, like someone methodically disassembling a machine that had long run unchecked. On the morning of the third day, A formal notice was posted to the community bulletin board and emailed to every resident. In sterile legal prose, it read, "Effective immediately, Section 4.3a of the HOA bylaws is hereby suspended, pending full legal review." No apology, no acknowledgement of wrongdoing, just the cold retreat of power cornered by truth. But beneath the surface, the ripples were irreversible. By noon, the HOA office was shuttered until further notice. The mailbox overflowed with certified letters and anonymous flags. Inside, Craig Halberd had cleaned out his desk, a single cardboard box carried briskly to the back seat of a matte black SUV. He didn't look back. No handshake, no statement. Just a vague line in an email sent to residents. "I am stepping down for personal safety and to allow the community to heal." The community wasn't healing. It was awakening. John's fine. The 312 fictional charge that had set this in motion was voided without ceremony, without a name attached. A piece of paper arrived by courier. One line, bolded. "Case closed. No further action required." But the echo went farther. The city council, under mounting pressure from veterans groups and state legislators, convened an emergency session. What began as local outrage swelled into state action. Within days, a senator, herself a Navy veteran, introduced the Mathis Amendment, a bill prohibiting any HOA in the state from restricting the display of flags, insignias, or memorial items by veterans on their private property. It passed the committee unanimously. Back on the cul-de-sac, the street was calm now. No camera crews, no crowds, just neighbors watering their lawns, kids on bicycles. A stillness that felt earned, not forgotten. John Mathis didn't speak to the cameras. He didn't issue a statement. He had no interest in vindication through sound bites. Instead, just after sunrise, he walked out in uniform, sharp creases, polished shoes, ribbons shining like fire against his chest, and unfolded the flag. His hands moved as they always had, deliberate, measured, sacred. But this time, as the flag rose into the morning light, cheers broke out from porches, balconies, sidewalks. Not loud, not rehearsed, just real. A neighbor saluted. Another wept openly. Children stood still, hands over hearts. And for the first time in years, John didn't feel like a relic from a fading country. He felt like part of a promise still kept. The knock was soft, more curiosity than urgency. Just 3 small raps on the old wooden door, barely loud enough to stir the morning stillness. John opened it slowly. The light outside was golden, slanting through the trees like it had something to say. On the porch stood a boy no older than 8, his shoes untied, a baseball tucked under one arm, and a seriousness in his face that felt too heavy for someone that small. "My dad said you're a real hero," the boy said, voice just above a whisper. "He said you stood up for all the soldiers. And the flag." John looked down at him, eyes softening. "Is that so?" The boy nodded quickly. "Can I salute it too?" John didn't answer right away. His gaze drifted past the boy, up to the flag fluttering gently on the pole by the porch, backlit by the morning sun. Its frayed edges still held, waving with the same steady rhythm that had marked every day since that long night. But now it flew not in defiance, but in peace. He opened the screen door and stepped onto the porch, knees aching, movements slow but sure. "Only if you do it right," he said. The boy looked up at him, unsure. John crouched beside him, a wince, a grunt, a hand braced against his knee, and placed one firm hand beneath the boy's elbow. "Straighten this, fingers together, thumb tucked in." He guided the small arm upward, slow and steady, until the fingers touched the boy's brow. "Now hold it. Don't fidget." The boy froze, lips pressed together, trying. John looked at him, the effort, the sincerity in those eyes. And for a moment, everything else disappeared. The meetings, the fines, the humiliation, even the thunder of that convoy. What remained was this: the next generation, reaching back with an open hand toward something bigger than himself. Not politics, not protest, respect. Behind them, the flag moved in the wind. Same cloth, same stars, same scars. But it felt different now. It stood not as a symbol of what had been lost, but of what had endured, what had been reclaimed. John placed his own hand in a slow salute beside the boy's. 2 generations. 1 line. Not just a flag, a stand taken, a silence honored, and a legacy passed forward without needing a single word more.